thunk! Get away from her, you overgrown pest! The chair leg slammed into the side of the head belonging to the Raha, the force causing Lutar to stumble, and the shot he was about to take went harmlessly into the floor. He barely had time to take stock of what was happening before the metal bar slammed into his leg, causing the insured Astorian to fall to the ground. Behind him stood the Zorthian, Fleur. It had taken screaming and all his might to pull himself through the narrow passages required to exit his confinement, but in the end he had done so. In the end, he'd managed to get here just in time. Thunk again, Fleur swung his weapon once more, the cracking of chitin this time sounding out as his beating continued, rage plastered over the Zorthian's face. He was done. He was done with those who had hurt him. He was done with those who were hurting his friends. Weeks of nightmares and fear all bubbled up into a fiery hatred of the being in front of him. Thunk, never! Thunk again, thunk will, thunk you, thunk hurt, thunk anyone! Each word was punctuated with a swing of the bludgeoning weapon, the sound of metal cracking against carapace as more white blood splashed onto the floor. Fleur wasn't a skilled combatant, but Lutar was already severely injured, and every blow the Zorthian gave was powered with anger, with a desperate need to no longer feel fear against those who had done him and those he cared about harm. Thud! The swing was stopped in mid-air as an insectoid-like hand grabbed the weapon before it could strike once again, stopping it where it was swung. Fleur tried to pull it back out of the Raha's grasp before Lutar wrenched the weapon out of his hands, causing the amphibian to stumble. Slowly and painfully, the Raha started to get to his feet, standing to his full height and staring down at Fleur with a murderous rage. "How dare you, you petulant pest! I am going to skin you alive and—" Lutar had been carrying with him a standard-issue combat knife, engraved with the holy words of Inch. The Raha, however, had been clumsy enough to leave the knife behind inside Amander. At that moment, Amander had decided to become a good citizen, and had returned the lost property to the Raha by throwing it at him. The blade had sunk deep into Lutar's head plates, all the way down to hilt, causing him to stare blankly forwards as his body tried to comprehend the massive amount of damage it had just taken. Mandibles twitched as if the Raha was trying to say something, yet no sound could be heard. This continued for a few moments, as if the insect was going to shrug off such an attack, before he slumped to the ground unceremoniously. Lutar twitched for a few moments more before finally, at long last, going still. Fleur stood there in silence, shaking as the intensity of the situation left his body in one go, trembling as all the adrenaline and anger left him. He gave the now dead Raha a final prodding kick, as if expecting the monster to rise back up from the dead like some B-movie villain. A gurgling, blood-filled breath snapped the Zorthian out of his stupor, as in an instant he rushed over to where Spot lay, giving a shout of alarm as Fleur quickly pulled out the bag of Medigal. The uplift was in a bad way. Many words could be said of the Raha's treatment of their toys, evil, cruel, sadistic, but being careful was not one of those. Blood lay pooled around Spot. Multitudes of deep cuts had been inflicted upon his body as many internal organs weren't internal anymore. Bones were smashed and broken like an horrific jigsaw puzzle, leaving a vague, canine-shaped person behind. As Fleur fumbled with the bag, he could tell this wasn't good. He might not be a doctor, but even he could tell that the uplift's current situation was not conducive to the continuation of life. "No, Amander." The half-conscious Spot gave a growl as Fleur approached, baring canine teeth in warning. "Help, Amander." Fleur turned to look at the second figure lying on the floor. He had just assumed that the presumably indestructible Terran was fine. It was Amander, after all. But on second look, she was also in a bad state. With the knife having been violently returned to its rightful owner, there was now nothing stopping Amander from bleeding to death. "I only have one. I only brought one with me." Fleur's eyes filled with tears as he realized the consequences of that statement. "I said Amander!" The ferocity in Spot voice left no room for discussion or argument, leaving Fleur to simply scramble over to the second Terran. Applying the life-saving medical miracle was so easy a child could do it, purposely designed as such. Just rip open the tab and apply to the wound. The color quickly returned to Amander's pale face, the mix of nanobots and genetic encoding doing its best to bring the Terran back from death's door. It took a mere 20 seconds for Amanda to go from nearly dead to slowly sitting up with a confused groan. Now that was a bit too close for my liking. It took a few moments of disorientation before the Terran realized that Fleur wasn't beside her side as she would expect. Instead, the Zorthian was sat next to Spot, forlornly trying to stop the uplift from dying. Spot! Amanda rushed over, ignoring the feeling of lightheadedness from the medical, hands scrambling for where she had been storing her own supply, finding nothing but empty space. The two tried up piles of useless gel on the floor, a testimony to the damage that Lutar had done, even after his death. Fleur, where did you put the rest of the gel? The desperation and terror in Amanda's voice was clear as her own hands joined in the futile attempt at stopping the bleeding. I only brought one. I don't have any more. Then why did you use it on me, you moron? Amanda shouted with a rage fueled by pure fear. This wasn't his fight, you absolute. Don't say things you'll later regret. Spot's voice was weak and quiet, but it interrupted Amanda all the same. I told him to do it. The sound of the uplift speaking took all of Amanda's attention, sapping the fight out of her and replacing it with sheer desperation. Spot needed medical attention immediately. What had been done was done. The only thing to do right now was deal with the situation at hand. Hey, buddy, keep talking, okay? Fleur, there'll be more gel at the dock. Just run! The Zorthian didn't need to be told twice, breaking into a sprint at the Terran's direction, leaving Amanda alone to try to do the impossible. She was covered in the uplift's blood as she tore clothing apart and bandaged wounds. Hey, Spot, I need you to tell me how to fix you. Amanda knew the basics of how to patch someone up, how to keep the more common causes of death at bay long enough to get help. But this was out of her knowledge set. Spot was a doctor. He'd know what to do. He'd know how to fix himself, right? The canine instead gave a small shake of his head at this request. He already knew the extent of his injuries, barely able to raise his head to take a look. I could do with some pain management right about now. That sentence turned Amanda's veins ice cold. She knew what Spot was trying to say, but she refused to believe it. She just needed to delay for a little while, delay until Fleur got back. 15 minutes, that's all they needed. No, 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 you're gonna be fine, you stay with me now. They both went silent, as Spot seemed to lose focus on his surrounding for a moment, and Amanda desperately used every trick she knew from years upon years of combat experience. Seconds turned to minutes as she tried to stop the tide from coming in, to fight against the inevitable. As every second ticked away, the uplift got weaker and weaker. Thank you. Thank you for choosing me, for giving me the chance to think. Spot gave a smile, each pant at this point being labored and irregular. Slowly he raised a paw and placed it on Amanda's cheek, stopping her frantic motions as she attempted to gain the time they needed. He didn't want her to worry. He made his choices, and he'd make them again if he had the choice. Don't talk like that. You're gonna be fine. You and me, we're gonna go traveling again together like old times. Just me and the best boy in the world. There was a spark of movement. Even through the pain and damage, those two words caused the mutilated stump of a tail to wag, spreading blood along the floor as it did so. Spot was just happy that Amanda was here. I wouldn't change a thing. You are a wonderful owner, and an even better friend. Amanda had stopped trying to staunch the flow of blood, instead reverting to begging for something to change, holding Spot in her arms as tears dripped down her face, holding him tight as she began to sob. Please just hold on. Fleur will be back any moment now, then you'll be fine. You can't go. I don't have anyone left. You're all I've got left. That was Spot's only regret. Leaving Amanda. But there would be others. There was Fleur at the very least, and he had faith that his friend wouldn't be able to go more than 10 steps without finding another person in the galaxy to help. It was just in humanity's nature to make friends. We'll meet again on the other side. I waited over 100,000 years in stasis to be reunited with you. I can handle a few more. Spot's breathing had slowed at this point. There was no more pain, just a peaceful feeling being held in his friend's arms. He'd done enough. Now it was time to rest. I will wait for you. Spot looked up into the eyes of his god, The first thing he could remember was staring into Amander's eyes, and those eyes would also be his last memory. With a final shuddering breath, the life left Spot as the canine started his long wait to be reunited with his friend once again. As Amander tilted her head back and gave a scream of grief to an uncaring heaven above.